Today we look at Resolutiion on the Nintendo Switch from Monolith of Minds. For a whole lot more videos like this one, check out our channel, give us a like, and subscribe. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Resolutiion, this new game and how it fits on the Nintendo Switch. Now, at first glance, this game kind of has that look and feel of some similar games in the genre, like Hyper Light Drifter or Tokyo 42, just to name a few. This game has that top-down, third-person kind of isometric view that is becoming popular in this new generation of consoles and on PC in general. This game is very PC friendly to me. It looks kind of like a game that would fit on that. There's so many different titles that I'm just struggling to remember right now that kind of look like they fit the mold. It's similar to a Metroidvania, but in a three-dimensional space, which is kind of cool. Now, speaking about how it fits on the Switch, I have to mention the visuals of this game. They're very bright, very neon, and these are similar tones that we've seen before on the Switch. Personally, I think it works out very well as a Nintendo product, even though it's kind of bloody and it's kind of like a ninja slashing game. In practice, that's the combat. It's more of this hack and slash kind of dodge your way through a bunch of enemies. Eventually you get to a point that's kind of like a boss fight, or you find like a scary enemy that you kind of have to take your time and learn, but for the most part you're just traversing a map that's pretty open to you depending on whatever items you get. That's kind of the other half of these games, is that while you're exploring, you have to collect these items that empower your character in better and bigger ways. Usually something that'll give you some kind of like movement advantage, like a dodge, or in this case you have the ability to see through the pixelated kind of fog that your missing memories have left you with. That's the kind of story element to this one. You have a missing memory, and you find your AI companion, Alibi, that will supposedly lead you through the world and kind of remind you about who you used to be. Now, that kind of plays out a little differently in practice, as it's not really certain if you're the good guy or the bad guy in this case. It's a really interesting dynamic because you're not really sure what to think in this crazy post-apocalyptic kind of mixing with cyborgs world that you find yourself in. The story is told in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way through a bunch of different characters, especially in one section where you're speaking to animals that kind of teach you about how to create an empire or how to manage each other of sorts. It's a kind of weird political throwback into this game that otherwise is pretty lighthearted. In this post-apocalyptic world, it's really kind of unclear as to what and who you are, and that makes up the meat of what you're discovering in the form of these upgrades and these little pieces of memories here and there, and these little tokens that you learn from the environment as to what kind of happened there. Sometimes you just get these little machine guys that will give you an item, and you can kind of see what items you have and what you're missing in this kind of hub world located in the north of the map. It's kind of interesting to have like a trophy room there, and it shows you just how big this game is. It's kind of misleading. You think it's perhaps something smaller, but when you get into it you realize that there's a lot of collectible kind of items and upgrades to get, and this game actually trails on for about 20 to 25 hours if you're a skilled player. Now, I have to admit, this game really did beat me up. It's not that I'm unfamiliar with this kind of game. I've played similar Metroid kind of games before, but not the isometric type. But that aside, I still had such a hard time figuring out what paths to take and what kind of areas I needed to go through to get to the objectives. The objectives are clear, they pop up on a map that I can reference at any time, but if I don't have the right item to breach that area, if I can't dissolve that barricade with nanites yet, how am I supposed to kind of get through the map? I get that it's pseudo open world, so perhaps I'm just finding items in a weird order, but that was just something that threw me off and really hindered my progress in the game. I know that I didn't get nearly as far as perhaps I should have with the amount of time I sank into the game, but that being said, it is quite an enjoyable environment, even though it kind of at times leaves a little bit to be desired in the terms of a more thought out combat pattern. A lot of it is just dodge around, shoot, wait till your energy reloads, and then kind of dodge around, shoot again. Using your sword as like a last-ditch effort, or maybe just a cheap shot, but that combat doesn't really bring a lot of difficulty or depth into it, and it only really goes so far. Even when you find some bosses, it's still the same tried and true tactics that generally take them down in the end. Now, lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the soundtrack to this game. At times, it can seem somewhat boring because of the simplicity of the individual tracks, but when you get into each different section of the map, or you go from one to another and you hear that music change, it's all very vaporwave, VHS kind of, that I don't want to say 80s tone to it because it's not quite that, but it's just this neon soundtrack, if that makes any sense, to accompany the visuals of the game. It generally fits in almost all circumstances, and it really did add that extra bit to the game. It would have been really sad without it. So those are my impressions on Resolutiion, this kind of weird neon cyberpunk kind of game, and I'm into it. It's not my usual forte, but it has those hooks in it that kind of got me, similar to a Metroid experience. It might have its shortcomings, and I really wish it had multiplayer to share the experience, but overall, this game was a pretty interesting grab, and I have to give this one a 6.5 out of 10. Fun, vibrant, and runs well on Nintendo Switch. A long game, but does little to innovate.